In the shadows of the Soviet Union, behind the glowing parades and the rigid symbols of power, there existed another world, a world never shown in newspapers, never captured on official film reels, never admitted in public speeches. This was the world of secret research, closed laboratories, and experiments so terrifying that even those who carried them out erased their traces. These stories were not about progress or glory. They were about fear, control, and the pursuit of something unnatural. Hidden beneath the red banners, it began quietly, in the years after the revolution, when the new regime believed that science could reshape a just society, that the human being itself. In forgotten basements of Moscow and Leningrad, strange laboratories were built. The goal was not only to heal, but to create, to mold the perfect worker, the perfect soldier, the perfect mind loyal only to the state. Men in white coats and dark uniforms gathered in secrecy, surrounded by the constant hum of machines. The first projects were harmless on paper, studies on sleep deprivation, tests on endurance, experiments with extreme temperatures. But soon they grew darker. Prisoners, often forgotten by the world, were forced into these trials. In the silence of stone corridors, their cries were absorbed by concrete walls. They became nameless subjects, identified only by numbers. Some of the earliest reports describe attempts to extend human survival beyond natural limits. A man placed in icy water until his pulse nearly stopped, then revived with electric shocks. Another locked in a chamber with no light, no sound, 4 days, until his voice broke into whispers, and finally, silence. These were not rumors spread by frightened neighbors. They were records signed and stamped, hidden in vaults of the NKVD, marked with one word: classified. As years passed, the hunger for control grew. With Stalin's rise, the obsession with loyalty deepened. If the body could be broken and remade, could the mind be reshaped as well? Psychologists were summoned to design methods of erasing memory, of implanting fear so deeply that it would never leave. Soldiers returning from battle were taken into these programs, their minds stripped and rewritten, tested like machines. One chilling account tells of a man who returned from such a program, unable to recognize his own wife. He repeated the same sentence over and over, a phrase whispered to him in endless repetition in his confinement. His eyes were empty, his gestures mechanical, as though the person he had once been was erased. His wife begged for answers, but the officials simply said, "He's no longer yours. He belongs to the state." Even darker were the experiments involving children. Orphanages, already overflowing with war's victims, became silent reservoirs for study. Some were trained in total isolation, never knowing the warmth of a family, raised to respond only to commands. Others were subjected to strange medical treatments, injections that promised greater strength, sharper senses, or longer endurance. The results were unpredictable. Some became shells of themselves, withdrawn, shaking, unable to speak. Others simply disappeared, their files marked as transferred, though no trace of them remained. The Soviet Union prided itself on progress in medicine, biology, and psychology, but behind official breakthroughs, there was always a hidden side, a side where failures were buried and silence was enforced by fear. Whispers among scientists told of attempts to revive the dead, inspired by early experiments of Sergei Brukhanenko, whose machines could keep a severed dog's head alive. These grotesque trials fascinated and horrified at once. Could the state command life itself, even cheat death? Some stories say that in one remote facility, they attempted to revive frozen soldiers, preserved in ice-like statues. The process was brutal, involving chemicals, electricity, and long nights of grotesque procedures. Few survived, and those who did return changed, their bodies trembling uncontrollably, their voices cracked with strange tones, as if life itself had been forced back into them unnaturally. To the outside world, these places never existed. To the state, they were triumphs hidden from foreign eyes. But to those who witnessed them, they were nightmares that could never be forgotten. And as the iron gates closed at night, the echoes of the lost lingered in the corridors, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. The experiments buried in silence beyond the walls of official institutions, deeper than the ordinary Soviet citizen could ever imagine, existed facilities that even high-ranking officers pretended not to know about. Their names were erased, their locations disguised as harmless factories or medical centers. Yet behind their locked gates, shadows worked tirelessly, chasing an idea more terrifying than any weapon: the manipulation of human nature itself. One such place was remembered only by whispers from a handful of survivors, a remote complex surrounded by endless forests, with barbed wire cutting through the mist. Guards patrolled night and day, their boots echoing on frozen ground. Locals called it simply the zone. They didn't know what happened inside, but they knew enough to stay away. Inside, the experiments were not limited to endurance or obedience. They turned toward the mind, toward dreams and fears. Scientists believed that by controlling human sleep, they could unlock hidden abilities or break resistance entirely. Volunteers did not exist. Instead, prisoners, soldiers accused of betrayal, and forgotten citizens were strapped to metal beds, eyes forced open under glaring lights. Days stretched without sleep, the human body trembling, hallucinating, and finally collapsing. But the officials were not looking for collapse. They were searching for transformation. Reports, fragments smuggled out decades later, describe chilling moments: men whispering to shadows in the corners, women screaming as if chased by invisible figures. In one case, a group of test subjects, deprived of sleep for over a week, began to speak in unison, repeating the same phrases, even though they had never known each other. Guards fled the room in panic, while scientists recorded every second with fascination. Was this madness, or had they uncovered something beyond explanation? But the most disturbing part was what followed. Some subjects refused to eat, claiming that food was no longer necessary. Others ripped at their own skin, muttering that something inside was trying to come out. The program was abruptly shut down, files locked away under military seals. Officially, it never happened, yet those who worked there confessed later, in quiet voices, that they still heard the whispers at night. At the same time, biological research advanced with equally disturbing intent. Projects codenamed with harmless numbers hid grotesque ambitions. In secret greenhouses and hidden laboratories, scientists attempted to alter the very structure of human biology. Injections, grafts, and exposure to radiation were tested endlessly. The victims, once again prisoners, soldiers, and orphans, were forced into roles of living test subjects. One file spoke of an attempt to create soldiers resistant to pain. Chemicals were injected into veins, deadening nerves, making subjects unable to feel cuts, burns, or wounds. At first, the results seemed promising. Men stood still while knives pressed against their skin, eyes wide but silent. But soon, their bodies began to decay from within. Without the natural warning of pain, they destroyed themselves unknowingly, their muscles torn, bones fractured, yet they kept walking until their hearts simply gave out. Another series of tests sought to sharpen human senses to unnatural levels. Drops placed in eyes to enhance vision, chemicals forced into ears to expand hearing. For some, it worked. They described being able to see stars in daylight or hear footsteps miles away. But the gift was a curse. Many went mad, unable to silence the endless flood of sounds, unable to close their eyes against visions too sharp, too detailed, like knives slicing through the brain. The Soviet dream of creating a new human was relentless. Files uncovered after decades reveal discussions of merging man and machine, inspired by early cybernetics, limbs replaced with crude mechanical attachments, nervous systems connected to primitive devices. These prototypes often failed, leading to grotesque suffering. Yet officials pressed forward, convinced that somewhere within the suffering lay a future soldier, more obedient, more durable, more loyal than any human could ever be. Whispers even tell of attempts to reach beyond life itself. Corpses frozen in laboratories, waiting for revival. Experiments in reanimating tissue, some inspired by wartime desperation when the dead were too many, and soldiers were too few. Sergei Brukhonenko's crude heart-lung machines were only the beginning. Later projects attempted to keep organs alive outside the body, or stitch parts together in grotesque attempts to restore life. Witnesses claimed to have seen movements in bodies that should have remained still, lips twitching without breath, eyes fluttering open in lifeless skulls. These were not horror stories invented by frightened citizens. They were fragments of truth, glimpses into a system where science was chained to power and ethics silenced under orders. Every failure was hidden, every scream was locked away in silence, and every success, no matter how disturbing, was filed away for the future. As the years stretched into the Cold War, the obsession only deepened. The Soviet Union stood against the West, and in this silent war, knowledge was as powerful as weapons. Laboratories multiplied, each more secretive than the last. Scientists no longer sought cures, but control of the body, the mind, and perhaps even the soul. Yet for every experiment that ended in silence, there were always survivors, broken, shattered, but alive. They carried the memories in their eyes, in their trembling hands. Decades later, some spoke, though most remained too afraid. They described the corridors, the rooms, the endless notes written by cold hands. They described being reduced to numbers, their humanity stripped, replaced by fear. What remains today are only fragments, yellowed papers, faded photographs, whispers that resurface like ghosts. The truth, buried under layers of denial, waits to be uncovered. And as the archives slowly open, the question grows louder. What did they truly create in the shadows of the USSR? The final shadows, buried truths of the USSR. As the decades moved forward, the Soviet Union built its strength on silence. What was not spoken did not exist. What was erased from paper was erased from memory. Yet in the hidden archives, where files were sealed with red wax and guarded by steel doors, the darkest secrets of the state endured. In the late years of Stalin's rule, whispers grew louder about experiments that reached far beyond the boundaries of science. Entire institutes, invisible to the public, operated under military supervision. Their work had little to do with medicine or progress. Instead, it centered on control of the body, the mind, and perhaps even the soul. One such program was hidden deep in the forests of the Urals. Survivors described vast underground bunkers, where men and women were locked away for years without contact with the outside world. They were given only the necessities to survive: food, water, air. But they had no sunlight, no voices, no hope. The purpose of the experiment was chillingly simple: to see how long the human mind could endure complete isolation. Reports that slipped through censorship tell of participants who began speaking to shadows on the walls, convinced that unseen companions lived with them. Others scratched symbols into the steel doors, marks that no one ever managed to decode. Some broke into violent rage, attacking themselves or smashing the few objects they had been given. When the doors were finally opened, many were unrecognizable. Some begged to be left in darkness again, insisting that the outside world was no longer real. But isolation was not the only path. Another program sought to test the limits of obedience. In hidden facilities near the Black Sea, soldiers were forced into impossible scenarios, ordered to harm comrades, to betray friends, to prove loyalty to the state above all. The goal was to create men who would follow orders without hesitation, no matter how inhuman. Those who resisted disappeared. Those who complied lost themselves, their humanity stripped away, until only obedience remained. Perhaps the most disturbing accounts involve the merging of science with superstition. Though the Soviet Union condemned religion and myths, some leaders quietly funded studies into the unknown. Psychics, occultists, and mystics were secretly recruited. Files speak of seances held in government offices, of attempts to contact the dead, of experiments to weaponize fear itself. If terror could break a man, could it also be directed like a bullet? There were rumors of dream experiments, in which subjects were forced into endless cycles of waking and sleeping, their dreams manipulated by sound, light, and suggestion. Some awoke screaming, unable to separate nightmare from reality. Others remain trapped in sleep, their bodies alive, but their minds unreachable, as though stolen into another world. Scientists recorded everything, noting changes in heart rates, brain waves, and whispered words that made no sense in any language. The Cold War only deepened these obsessions. With America as the eternal rival, Soviet leaders demanded results that would surpass any Western discovery. The KGB searched the globe for forbidden knowledge, ancient manuscripts, occult artifacts, secret medical research stolen from defeated enemies. Whatever was found was shipped back to Moscow, locked away, and studied in silence. Some say that deep in Siberia, entire towns were relocated to conceal testing grounds. Buildings stood empty, streets abandoned, as experiments unfolded behind guarded fences. Strange lights were reported at night, shadows moving where no one lived. Locals whispered of screams carried by the wind, of soldiers who left on duty, but never returned. The most terrifying part of these stories is not their strangeness, but their erasure. When projects failed, witnesses were silenced. Entire archives vanished overnight. Scientists who knew too much disappeared without a trace. Their names struck from records, their families told to forget. What remained were fragments, a burned document here, a smuggled diary there, and the whispers of those who dared to speak to the collapse of the USSR. When the Soviet Union finally fell in 1991, thousands of files were opened to the public, yet the most disturbing ones remained sealed. All were destroyed before they could be seen. Researchers who searched for them encountered empty shelves, shredded paper, and vaults filled with nothing but dust. Still, some fragments survived, enough to piece together an outline of horrors once thought impossible. Among the most chilling is a note found in an abandoned KGB facility. Written in a rushed hand, it reads, "We opened the door too far. What we brought back was not human. Seal the chamber. Do not enter again." No context, no explanation, only those haunting words. Did the Soviet Union truly succeed in controlling the human mind? Did they bend life and death to their will? Or were they simply lost in their own fear, blinded by ambition, creating monsters out of men? The truth may never be fully known. What is certain is that behind the red banners and parades, a darker world existed, a world where science became cruelty, where progress became horror, and where silence was the strongest weapon of all. And perhaps the most unsettling thought of all is this: not everything was destroyed. Some knowledge survived. Some techniques were passed on, and somewhere, hidden in forgotten basements or locked behind new walls, the echoes of those experiments may still be waiting.